Hello, I am Space Tomato. I'm here with Execute and Algared, and we're going to talk to you guys about the bitter truth of project development and what it means for Star Citizen.
Yeah, so I guess this kind of episode of 2 weeks, I think we kind of were
Mm,
brainstorming this as a group with Tomato. We've done this a few times now. And it's just a tricky one to work through because obviously it could be negatively taken, but it's basically like an extension of why on the nature of development, and basically kind of going a little bit deeper on that response. So it's not
mm.
just that same standard tagline. It's going to go a little bit deeper and kind of explain what is the nature of development, not just give you that stock standard line that they always give. And I think one of the most obvious things is the speed of development for Star Citizen appears to be absolutely glacial. And one
Mm.
thing you'll always hear us talk about is they're very clearly working on Squadron 42 and not working on Star Citizen. And we're only getting an overflow from Squadron 42 onto Star Citizen. So that's kind of what you've probably heard us talk about before. And
But then we
I,
also have that game dev um, Star Citizen Live episode they did
mm,
that really helped us show how that game development stuff worked, didn't we?
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a little bit. I actually want to talk about the real world example first, if we can.
Yep.
So, Space, can you give us that example you were talking about when you worked as an engineer?
Yeah. So I was working at a company, very big company, Fortune 50, multinational company, and they had a huge product that they were wanted to release. Years of development, billions of dollars, hundreds of people working on this project, and it was ready to go. Not completely ready to go, but it was probably about a year off before they realized that they would need to delay the product. They had one small part, one tiny 10 centimeter nozzle that needed it had a pretty important function, and this nozzle couldn't handle a certain task that was introduced later on in the design process. So when this when this problem was found out, they needed to go back all the way back in the design phase to all of these different groups of people who had worked on different things that worked together with this nozzle, diffusers, turbines, all of this machinery that was then suddenly it needed to be reworked because the nozzle had to change, everything else had to change, and this caused a
Mm.
cascade effect that ultimately came out to a multi-year, 2.5 year delay, I believe, for a really big product launch.
So they had to rework everything they'd done, is what you're
Just
basically saying,
about,
right?
yeah, to an extent, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can clearly see something like that having a similar effect in Star Citizen or Squadron 42. So, a really obvious example is when they bring in procedural planets. A lot of things would have changed. The development got pushed out. That's why we hear things like Answer the Call 2017 and it's now 2020, 3 years later. Where the hell's answering the call? And
Mm.
that's because things changed quite
Yeah.
drastically, in fact. And another example, I was going to talk about salvage and that, but we'll talk about that a little bit
Yeah.
later.
But we
Um,
also hear them talk. We do hear them talk about blockers at times as they're going along, and a
mm,
blocker for that project, which Space was talking about, was that nozzle. That
mm.
nozzle actually stopped development. So when Star Citizen gets that nozzle, it can have that cascade
Mm.
effect that makes them have to redo things.
The other interesting part was, though, is if you listen to his nozzle example, is how it didn't perform the new function that was required. So it
Yeah.
was intended to do this and it worked totally fine, but it also had to add this little part to it, and
And
that
the second they
totally
added that
changed.
little part,
Yeah, just like this
yeah,
little
and that's
And
cherry
what,
on top and the whole, what do you call that? The straw that broke the
a
camel's
house of
back.
cards.
yeah,
Yeah, House of Cards.
A
That's
and
another
that's
one.
that's the thing is that probably wasn't even the first thing that delayed it, right? That was
Yeah.
just the first thing I knew about. You go all the
Yeah,
way
yeah,
back to the
yeah.
design phase in
yeah,
2005, and they wanted to release this thing in 2010, and they realized,
Yeah.
"Oh, the
yeah.
technology doesn't exist. Let's push it back to 2016."
Oh, hang on.
Like,
The technology doesn't exist. We've got to develop that technology. Doesn't that sound like Star
Yeah.
Citizen?
Well, that
yeah,
well that,
it
that
happens
it's
all the
R
time.
and D. That's how they. So to go back
Yep.
and fix that nozzle, they would have had to do R&D, and that's basically what development is. It's best guessing, and then for we're doing research and development to see if you can actually do it.
And then you
Um,
think you've
For
got it, and you add something else, and you go, "Oh crap! Got to go
yeah,
back and do it again."
I would say for any of you space nerds out there, which I'm sure there are plenty considering what we're talking about, uh, the James Webb Space Telescope.
Yep.
That's another example, pure and simple.
Mm. Elaborate just a little bit for those that may not be in the know.
Well, so that's a telescope. I believe it's being developed by various companies. I know it through Northrop Grumman. And this thing, I don't know the exact details, but I know that this thing has been worked on for such a long time. It's gone so over budget. It was supposed to be in space, I think a couple years ago. It's still on the ground. They're still working on the mirrors and getting the fine polish and the finish. But this is something that we've been planning for such a long time. And the technology just hasn't been able to keep up to make it a possibility.
I think in short, you can almost take any real world example that has had delays. So,
Yeah.
we'll move on now to what you were going to talk about before, Algared, and the schedule. So I'll let you talk about that a bit. Go for it.
Well, when CIG have talked about schedules, and even on the roadmap, we say, why is such and such been removed? That's a constant complaint you hear. And there was a live Star Citizen live show on game development and project management, and we will put the link down in the description. If we remember and remember where it is, we'll actually put a card up here somewhere so you can actually click on it and go to that video as well. It's probably one of the most watched Star Citizen lives that we've got that have been out there. And it wasn't nice pictures. It wasn't concepting art. It was literally an hour of spreadsheet, and it was Sean Tracy and Kieran going through.
Karen Davis.
Yeah.
Eric Karen
Davis.
Yeah.
I kept going to call him John Rhys Davies, and I was like, no, it's not John Rhys Davies.
It's all good.
He's a voice.
But they went through looking at what things they'd have to do if they were adding the space whale, because space whale was something everyone wanted.
Now, before you go into the space whale, I do want to say it shows in the scheduling that they are doing their best guesses. They are they're guessing how long it's going to take. They're using their experience of what they've done previously to say they're an animator. They're going, well, normally when I do an animation, it takes me this amount of time. So or they've looked at animators that have animated things in the past, and they go, that should take them about this long to do. So they're just taking their experience and making the best guesses. And now if you listen to what Algared's going to talk about in regards to the space whale, you'll connect the dots. So Algared, go ahead.
Yeah, so they went through looking at the space whale and going through all the things and looking at and they even said in the video, we're going to ask you guys what you want in the space whale. The more you add, the more it's going to blow out time. The more bits and pieces you want, the more we're going to have to add and develop it. And I'm going to pass it over to Space Tomato, because you actually did some calculations on what it would take to bring that space whale into game. What did you find out?
And I actually wanted to comment real quick on that point you just brought up. They did. There was a point at which they were like, okay, we're going to put a poll out. And what do you guys want with the space whale? And then they gave them that caveat. And suddenly the poll started to change. They were like, okay, if you add these many choices, it's going to start to blow out that time. And slowly they started to, the people started to vote for less choices. I thought it was funny. Yeah.
Less than more. Yeah.
Yeah. It started to cut. But yeah, so I went and I watched the video, and like I looked through, you can check it out as well, like we said on the video description, but you can see how many days they estimate for this. And like Execute said, this is best guess. They're optimistic people. You have to be to do something like this. So they're saying best guess, this is how many days it would take. And I did the math, and considering decent pay for these people, some of them are probably getting paid much more than I assumed, but it came out to something like $13,000 to just make this one feature at the absolute fastest period, considering nobody else has anything else on their plate. No other features are being worked on by this team. There's no sickness, there's no world events, there's no pandemics, there's no delays. And clearly that's not what happens. So I thought that was crazy.
What's the saying? Best laid plans go awry.
Yep.
Yeah.
No plan survives first contact.
Yeah. So it really adds context that not only do these things take a lot of time, but they also need to look at the time and then juggle, okay, can we afford to tackle this feature, assuming that it could possibly go way out of scale? And will it come at a proper time for the game where everything else is developing? Will it work with Squadron 42? There's just so many variables in play every single time they're looking at a feature. This is why sometimes...
Sorry, go on.
No, this is why sometimes you'll see a feature that we thought was going to come And then they kind of go back to the drawing board and they're like, wait a second, this is really going to hurt development if we do it right now. Let's push it back a couple quarters or maybe a year.
And sometimes you find that the people who are working on the project actually have to get shuffled to something else. And so you might have 10 people starting on the space files to start with, and then halfway down you find, oh, I've got to move 5 of them off to do something else. And so
Mhm.
that shuffling of staff also increases or can increase or decrease development of an item as well. So you've got multiple factors impacting.
Yeah.
And this kind of moves on to the next kind of topic we're going to talk about, and that's their intent with the roadmap. So that, the old one was their best guesses and stuff like that, but because it was more event based and less task and scheduling based, you couldn't see a lot of what was happening in the background, and that's kind of what I feel they want to show that a lot more in the new one. And in the new one, you're going to be able to see who, what, where and why type of details, rather than just it's these 80 things that need to be done, and you can't see any context as in why one takes a week and one takes a day type of thing.
Yeah. You actually made, when we were talking earlier, Execute, you made a really good point that I thought really summed it up. The old roadmap, or the roadmap we've got at the moment, really is where we're headed.
Yeah.
And it's just at the points we need to go, the main turn-offs we want to go to get there.
Mhm.
But it didn't have the detail. The
Yeah.
new roadmap's actually got the landmarks, the details, the side streets, and everything else on that map. So you can, it's everything rather than just the destination. And that's big. That's huge.
And that's a realistic part of it. That goes back to project development, is when you're planning a task, when you're planning a feature, you're not just marking off a number of tasks that you're doing. You're literally finishing other features that feed into that feature. So having a new roadmap that's going to talk about these dependencies and these features, it's going to be more than just, like Execute was saying, ticking off tasks off a number. We're now going to be ticking off features.
I think a really important, very small take. I don't know. You tell me what you think. But everyone in their life makes plans, and there are so many unforeseen consequences that you just cannot predict. And then you magnify that on a massive project like the Nozzle project, or I call it the Nozzle project, or Star Citizen or Squadron 42, and you can quickly see how things can get totally lost because there's just so many moving parts. How do you keep track of all that? And I think that's really important to remember. If you can stuff up, anyone can stuff up, and we're only all human and doing our best guess. Sorry, Algared.
And one of the things with the roadmap at the moment, one of the things I constantly hear is people say, "Oh, they had 15 tasks left to go on this thing, but now they've got 20. What's going on?" And part of it is just that going back and having to do things, or unknown things that
unforeseen
have popped up.
consequences. I'll keep calling it unforeseen consequences because it's the name of the first episode of Half-Life. I think it's very fitting. Anyway.
So yeah,
I think we'll give some examples now of delays in release of gameplay, and I think a lot of people look at mining and like, well, we've got mining. Why do we not have this other stuff? And I don't know. I'll let one of you guys take the floor if you want. But I think for me, mining is clearly, there is a part of mining in Squadron 42. I think that's why it was pushed forward in front of other stuff. And for me, I think some of the other professions will have a doubling up of work. And that's my takeaway. But what do you guys think?
Well, I think that what happened, so this is 2017, I think, when we started to see professions on the roadmap, and we saw salvage, repair, mining, I think refueling as well. And they did get mining started, but they probably had a period of time there after 3.0 came out where they realized, okay, we have some really big hurdles we need to hit for the game to run well enough to enjoy these aspects. So mining got through the door, and as you said, it might be in Squadron 42, but it got through the door. It was started. They decided to go on with it. But these other professions, they realized, we need to get other things that are going to make these more enjoyable. iCache, OCS, server meshing, maybe even higher player counts before these things are even going to be usable.
I just had a small epiphany. There might have also been some downtime for the people that were able to work on that feature. So they
Sure.
were
Yeah.
to let mining slip through the door or come forward because they had downtime. They didn't need them for something, so they got a bit of tier 0 mining done. So that's another thing.
Yeah. And
And I
and it go
go on,
ahead.
keep going. I was going to say that, and being the first one, they tend to like to get one done and then iterate on it. And I think that was what with mining, they were going to get tier 1, tier 0 mining, and then bring in the tier 0 other stuff. But then went for problems that were there, and they thought, okay, let's just develop this. And I think mining is very much like the Gladius. So Gladius is the test bed for everything to do with ships. It's where they put the UI. It's where they put thrusters. Where they do everything. That's where they do the testing. And I think mining is really the same way with professions. Everything they're doing and all the things they want to try, and even the back end stuff, they're doing that so they can link other stuff in.
Just taking that as an example, Algared, you can already see certain blockers on mining alone. So, for example, just in this week's STAR-XXV Live, they talked about the UI and how it was held up because we were going to talk about this a little later, but the Flash is actually being mothballed at December 31st at the end of this year. Like my computer literally asked me to uninstall it this week because they're not going to be using it as of the end of the year. So that you can clearly see, well, if Flash is dead, what are we going to use now? So that was, did they go ahead and make a Flash that they knew was not
the
going to be
nozzle we're
active?
using. The nozzle we're using isn't going to work.
In 6 months' time, Flash will not exist. Do we sit here and develop all this UI, or do we wait till we make our own and then work on salvage, repair, etc., etc.? That's not even talking about other things like iCache and server meshing and all that. That's just one potential blocker, and I'm sure there are many for most, if not all, of the professions.
Yeah, and that's just and that one would affect everything. So let's just develop our in-house, I suppose, method for and use it on this system, and then we can apply it to the other systems as we bring them in.
You gonna say, Space?
Well, so we hear about these go, no-go meetings when it comes to specific features. We heard about them with moons. We hear about them with professions and patches in general. Something I was thinking of earlier was they probably had a pretty big go, no-go meeting when it came to the professions. And they realized we can't go on this. This isn't going to be worth it. It sucks for us, right? Because we see something and we're like, cool, they're going to put it in the game. We want it. I want it now. And they have to go and they meet and they decide this just isn't going to work. It's a mistake that we put it on the roadmap already, but it's best if we just cut our losses now and hold it off. And that's part of the difficulty of it coming from our perspective.
I think when you talked earlier about how on the scheduling where people were doing the votes, and when they quickly realized if they do, all these different features, it's going to take longer and longer. You can clearly see very quickly if they have to double up on work. So if they give us all that work now to make the UI now, when the UI is not going to work in 6 months, that is a shit ton of wasted work. Like that's heaps. And we're seeing that a lot. And I think you really need to realize, like, yeah, we want it now, but sometimes we just have to wait. And I get this massive feeling that there's a lot of there's some real pivotal blockers, and that's why you always hear things like iCache and server meshing. Once they start to move out of the way, I think a lot of the floodgates will open. I think a lot of the work is sitting there in the background, already done. It just can't be used because we don't have the technologies
the
to use them.
Not there, or the bits and pieces aren't there.
Or at the very least, they have the schedule written out. They know the teams they need to have. They know the work that needs to be done.
Exactly.
And even if it's not already done, they know it can be done in 6 months once they get past that blocker.
Yeah. All right. So I
was gonna make another point that related to what you were saying, but it's just gone from me. But it felt one of those pivotal moments. One of those. But if I remember it, I'll come back. But
no worries. So we're going to move on to kind of bringing it all together now. So it's kind of like this big picture, because a lot of us, as people that watch this, we only really see the big picture, and we're not really up close and personal with each little task. And how do I word this? So a lot of the time we do not understand the intricacies of what it is to be like I used the animator before. So you've got what is required just to do animations. We kind of backseat develop, and we think it's we try to use logic and explain, but we don't have those intricate details.
And related to that, because I've just remembered that point, is
Okay.
when they have those blockers and they say, oh, about repeat of work, when they have had to do that repeat of work, what have you seen from the forums or what have you seen from the community? They're wasting resources. They're redoing this again. And sometimes it's because they've had to. Sometimes it's if they give us the stuff early, they are going to have to redo it again.
It's
And so it's that catch-22, isn't it? It's a, do I give it
nozzle
now
example
and have to redo it, or do we hold it off and frustrate people?
Yeah, as you said, with the nozzle, they made the nozzle. It didn't work. They've got to re-R&D it, and they've got to do it again. They try their best.
That's why projects are so expensive.
Yeah, because sometimes you try your best and it doesn't work, so you have to go back to the drawing board, and try again.
But with the community wants a game now. So do they put in? Do we want, as a community, would we want them to put in medical gameplay or salvage now, and spend the 100 hours or 200 hours putting it in, with the knowledge that they've got to actually redo the whole thing and spend that time again doing exactly the same thing to get it to the same level? Or do you want to hold off and be able to get not only that first level, but the second level and the third level in the same amount of time? But that's the problem we have, isn't it?
It is. So I'm going to give some examples now where we can actually see some progress moving forward, and I think the obvious one, because we talked about it a little bit before, is the new UI overhaul, and that's obvious because of, as I said before, Flash ends at the end of this year, so they had to make their own, or they had to make something else, and they chose to use their own. And there's obviously some massive advantages we're already seeing. Like with Flash, everything was customized. It was to one ship, and it had to be, they had all these constraints on them. And this new system they've designed, yes, it took time to design, but it sped everything up. So every time they add a new ship, they don't have to go back to the drawing board. So it took, X amount of time here, but they've saved all that future time. And you see that again and again with all the tools they've designed. Like, think about how the planetary tech, how long it used to take them to make one system, as opposed to now how long a lot of the tools have been finished. They can do a whole, what was it? They were doing a moon in 2 days with one person.
They can just paint an entire planet with one person incredibly quickly.
And now they're actually regoing and redoing planets and polishing them up to a higher standard and much quicker than they were.
And they told us about those tools way back. Do you remember the bucket tool about chucking all the different plants and all that in? They told us about that at the very beginning, but that only came into fruition in the last couple of months. Like, that's taken years to get off the ground. And we're just now starting to see those. Like, it takes time to develop.
And that's just one.
Everything.
And that's just
one.
That's
one. Yeah, exactly.
One little thing.
Yeah, exactly. Another one that we're probably going to see really soon, to give you another example, is the empty cargo decks. At the moment, in 3.11, it's like, oh, great, another location. But that's going to pay off in a couple of months' time when big cargo finishes, and then you actually have a place to go, and you'll see all these different cargo boxes, and it's starting to be able to connect the dots, and that's the kind of message I want to kind of give here in this example of things that are finished. Is start looking at all the tools they've made. Sorry, my camera keeps going out of focus, and actually connect the dots. And once you connect the dots, you can start to see all the jigsaw piece puzzles of the project coming in and start to form the game. And I think the other side of that is because they don't show us everything, it can appear very hollow. And I think that's what we're going to kind of move on to now. Why do they not communicate with us like they used to? So...
But before we do that, I just want to. I was thinking of the last video where we were talking about with Brian Chambers was on the recent one, and he was saying we're closer to the end. We're closer to the end of the tunnel than we were at the beginning, and that's what we're like, isn't it? It is, isn't it? As things are going, we can see we're getting there. It's just taking so long, and it's frustrating. And to go on what we were saying, we want to know. Why does it feel so hollow? So back to what you were saying,
and that's what we're getting to, is why they're not sharing as much as we were. And I think we're kind of coming to the final takeaway here, of this entire episode. And I'll kind of start by saying, but no other developer started out being as open as these guys were. But I think time and time again, and I've written this down in the notes, is once bitten, twice shy. And I think they've been... I've got a cat attacking me, sorry. Basically been kind of had so many times where they've wanted to be that real open. They've just been... It's hurt them so much that they can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
And you can understand that, can't you? You know, if you spend weeks working on a ship and everyone in development's thinking it's awesome, the original Phoenix design.
Yeah.
Do
you remember what
and
the very...
you show
the...
stills of the original Phoenix, and it looked great. And then we went through it.
Yeah. Do you remember the very first time it happened, Algared? Do you remember the first event that kind of started the closing of development? Because I actually remember exactly what it was, and it was the freelancer cockpit.
And
they worked on that.
Yeah,
everyone was complaining about the view, and up until this point, they showed they were showing concept art, all their work, day after day. They were showing stuff, and then just basically out of nowhere,
the community went, "This sucks. This is stupid. This is moronic. This is dumb."
And they told the community, they said this will not work, and they spent 2 days redoing it, and it didn't work, right? And that's where they realized there is all these backseat developers, and we just have to do it without them because they don't know what they're talking about. And that's true. Like, if I'm an engineer, I'm an engineer. If I'm a flight hostess, I'm a flight hostess. They're game developers. We're not. Or it used to be.
But on the other side of the coin...
On the other side of a coin...
They did sign up for it. That was why they got so much money, was because they said they were going to be open. So we get to this point where they're like, okay, so we could be open, but it's going to be a very tumultuous experience for us. And it's honestly probably going to end up with a lot of anger and a lot of misunderstanding. But but then they could be like, okay, well, we got your money. Now we're going to be closed and not tell you guys much because you guys are annoying. And we're just going to get this out like we want to do it because this is Chris's project. This is our project. And you can believe in either of those philosophies, but it's a matter of they did kind of sign up for this.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there is also the side where you sign up, but you don't sign up to be abused and vilified. And that's often what happens. You know, you look at the response to people to the freelancer window or to the Phoenix interior. Now, we saw the original pictures. Hey, it looks great. A bit gaudy, but, you know, the pictures look great. And then we got inside the Phoenix and walked around it. And there's a shower in the hallway. There's, you know, and the community went to town.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you spent days working on the thing and then people start telling you it's crap, you feel bad. It doesn't matter what profession you're in. If someone starts telling you you're doing a crap job, you start to get defensive.
While internet culture was different back when they started this project in 2012 than it is now. We're here. We're on YouTube, right? We've seen YouTube comments. We know how the internet is. That you gotta be ready for that.
Look, I'm kind of... How do I put this? It really is the loud minority that is basically caused a lot of these issues. I think you can see examples of it across the board. They don't talk as much as they used to. I don't think they have downvoting on Spectrum, because I think if they had downvoting, they're worried that it's going to cause problems. So they just want positivity. And I don't think that anytime there's negative comments on Spectrum, they're deleted. They don't ever share any news that's negative. They only ever share positive news. They don't share delays. They try to... No, there's no delays. You know, they're all... And it's all because anything they've ever said that's bad news is generally met with super over-the-top critical complainents. And not constructive complaints, critical, as in insulting and toxic. And I think... let me finish.
And that's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a problem. And I think it's our fault. And I don't mean just the loud minority. I think it's all of us. And I think if we were going to help anyway, we'd almost have to... The silent majority almost needs to somehow ring in the loud minority. And I don't know how we would do that, But that's what I think the problem is. Because let's be honest, most of us sit here quietly and just ignore them. But we've seen that spreading of Spectrum to Reddit. One of the things we were talking about before the show is we all used to go to Reddit. I don't go there anymore. Algared doesn't go there anymore, and I think you said too, Space, you don't go there anymore either. And that's because the people,
Occasionally, maybe.
yeah, very rarely. I go there maybe once every 3 months, But those people from Spectrum have spread from Spectrum to Reddit, and it's not the same place it used to be. I used to get up every day, and it was the first thing I did. And I haven't been there in probably 2.5 years because it's just memes and a bunch of stuff to me that really doesn't matter.
I used to be there all the time.
So, long story short, I think the takeaway from this episode is it's kind of how the community has reacted to CIG, and that is their counter response, is just say nothing. So it's kind of our fault, because for two reasons: we don't understand development. Let's be honest, we're not game developers. And the second part is, as humans, how we've responded. And we need to kind of reflect and look at ourselves and how we would deal with planning. And we all plan in our lives, no matter how small, and how there are blowouts in our own little planning, and basically put that into a massive project. And it's really obvious and really quite simple when you break it down. It's just a human nature problem, and we all have trouble communicating as well. Like I can tell you, me and Algared have conflictions, and when me and Algared have a problem, we have to sit down and talk about it. And it's also
texting never works.
Yeah, we are really terrible if we text each other. But as soon as we get on to voice and talk, problem solved, because it kind of humanizes it. And a lot of the way they choose to talk is through things like text. And a really good example that we never talked about, that we should have talked about, is the monthly report. That thing is full of information, but it's dense as hell. You really need to be a game developer to understand it and break it down and absorb the context of what they're saying. And even as a former developer myself, I have to put it on text to speech because it's just so bloody. I can't absorb it.
Yeah, I have to read that 2 or 3 times. I'll skim read it. I'll pick out the bits I want to read. I'll read those in depth. I'll go. It takes me 2 or 3 days to actually absorb it, and I still don't understand half of it. I just know, it's huge. And you brought it up before, Space. That monthly report isn't just a monthly report. It's actually a report from each studio and each team in the studio telling us what they're working on. It's massive.
We used to. I just realized. So you guys remember those older Around the Verse episodes? We used to get a solid 40-minute episode, right? And it would basically be the studio's update for that month, and then talk about features. And thinking about that, it's kind of similar to the monthly report. It's less work because they don't have to go and take people away and film them. Now they got it all in text, but it really just shows. You get character art, you get vehicle art, you get features, you get gameplay features, you get vehicle features, you get audio, you get FX. All these sections are all different teams, and all of these teams constantly are showing you, this is what we're working on, this is what we're working on. And you get an idea of how much stuff is moving around in the company at any given time when you read the monthly report.
We were, in the notes I've got up here, 4 countries and 6 development studios. You trying to do the text messaging or the Skype or however they communicate internally, you can start to see, again, that creates more problems. And we are all just humans at the end of the day. So I think, for me, the real big takeaway of this whole episode is that it is partial. The project is now a lot bigger than it used to be. So it's a part of its success is also a part of its communication problem. But I also think it's there's so many more of us. And there's a burden on us and there's a burden on them. But I think the way they act now is because of how we've acted in the past. So if we change the way we act, they will change the way they act. Yeah, they may. I reckon they will, though. I reckon they will.
Yeah.
They are human after all, just like the rest of us. So if you want to see communication improve, I think you need to start look at yourself, and just all as individuals, we need to start to change how we are. And I think I'm going to be honest and kind of a bit harsh here. It's that loud minority of people. They are the ones that are on Spectrum every day in front of the devs complaining. It's them that are doing most of the damage. Not all, but most of the damage. And I think they need to start being a lot more constructive and a far less critical. You want to say, Algared?
And I was going to say that's the key. It's being constructive in the way in which we criticize. And sometimes we've actually got to listen when the game developers say, yeah, look, that's not going to work. We've actually tried that type of thing. It's not going to work. Trust us. We've actually got this working. And they, no, try. And they do it. Yeah, it's not going to work.
Yeah, not just saying something sucks, but actually also providing a possible solution to fix it. Just saying, oh, this is bullshit. I don't give a crap. You know, not that. You know, this is wrong. I would suggest you try this. Or have you guys thought of this?
The ship that I always bag as being horrid, the Constellation. Classic example. Constellation used to have a hangar for the P-52, which is what we call the cargo deck. Down the track, it was pointed out the P-52 doesn't actually fit in the cargo in its hangar. It's too wide. And one of the solutions was, hey, what if you put it at the back on a clamp? And so I looked at it, and less work, you know, it solved the problem. And they took that on board. It was a constructive criticism of the problem that was there, and it was taken on board. Same as the interior with that interior shower.
And connecting the nozzle and the Phoenix together, the Phoenix is one of the Constellation is one of the oldest ships in the game, and it has had multiple iterations, and you can see that that's probably why it almost needs to be taken back to the drawing board, because it's just been stacked and stacked and stacked and stacked and built on, and it's created a bunch of issues. All right, I think that's kind of where I want to end today's episode. Space, is there anything else you want to add? Now, Algared and I have kind of had our piece.
Well, I just want to kind of voice what I think the bitter truth is that I've gotten from all of this. And that is that not only is project development hard, but when you have a project that has grown astronomically fast, it's hard to keep up with it. And that you can blame that on CIG. Of course you could blame that on CIG. You could blame that on a lot of different groups. I mean, let's take this is probably not the best example, but the guy who
Sorry, I've got to say, they wanted 21 million. They're over 300 million. I think it's really gone out their scope of what they wanted to do. All right, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
It can blow you away. Look at the guy who made the Flappy Bird, right? Didn't he end up having a ton of problems because he just blew up so quickly and didn't know how to handle it? And eventually it all kind of crashed down. The fact that CIG hasn't completely screwed this up yet, I think is pretty good. But I'm also not going to give them a pass for that because they brought this on themselves. They expanded it. They kept growing. They brought in more features. So there's a bit of a give and take here. And that's the bitter truth for me, is that a lot of this sucks. Delays suck. Project development is hard. Things are going to go wrong. But in the end, we have to accept it. What else can we do? We're not going to storm the headquarters and hold them hostage until they finish the game. This is where we are. This is what it is. It's a huge $300 million project across 6 studios in 4 different countries with 20-something teams, all with 5 people each, and they're all doing different tasks all at the same time. That's difficult. So we kind of have to sit here and accept it and voice constructive criticism when we can.
We can also look at what we can do to change the situation, and that's kind of another takeaway for me. Like, we can look at how we critique and criticize, and maybe be a little bit more positive. And the other thing is actually give praise when it's due. Like praise them when they've done a good job, and and critique them. It's just a little bit of human decency goes a long way. And I think both of you would agree the internet is very much dehumanized because of its text-based
because
nature.
you're nameless. People forget that they become the dark side, I suppose, because they're not they're not responsible for their actions because you can't be seen.
And look how Chris came out and actually started talking to people when people were being constructive, so he is slightly rewarding us for our actions. So if we keep being constructive rather than critical, I think we'll get a lot further with CIG.
There are
And
ways that both the supporters and the company can improve
mm,
the current situation.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, he's been Algared. He's been Space Tomato. Space Tomato, can you let people know where they can find you, man?
Yeah, so I create content here on YouTube, actually. It's just Space Tomato on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
I do cinematics, I do reviews, I do news videos, I do opinion pieces,
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff. I also stream on Twitch on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And generally, we play together. I do a newcomer show where anybody who is a newcomer to the game can come on. We show them the game, we run them through the missions, and give them the ringer. I'm
Awesome.
on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. We have a Discord server, really all the things. So if you're interested in Star Citizen or sci-fi gaming in general,
Come
come
hang
and
out.
check me out. Yeah.
Awesome. For us, subscribe, Patreon, all that usual stuff. Leave us
ring
your
the bell.
comments. Yeah, all that stuff. But leave us comments below on what you think of this. Is there stuff that we can do to change how that works? I think as humans, we need to work on some stuff ourselves as well as CIG. Everyone's been very critical of CIG, but I think we could also look at how we've been acting, and that's a big takeaway from me. For me, is that it's not just their fault. We are all humans together, so we all have to work on this.
Mhm.
And I think the reason they are acting the way they're acting is because they're reacting to us. So that was a big takeaway for me for this episode. We have to let Space Tomato get back to hitchhiking the galaxy now, so I thought that had to be said. Anyway, we'll catch you guys in the next one.
All right.
Take care. God bless and be well.